So the label slopes command is a new command in the Rockpile reporting menu. You can find it up here under the drafting group, and it's called label slopes. And the label slopes command has been designed to allow you to label the slope direction along with some other attributes like horizontal distance, slope distance, bearing and azimuth between any 2 points. And those 2 points can be defined by lines, by points, or by surface vertices, or by surface triangle surface information. So to run the command, you're going to go to the reporting menu, you're going to run the label slope command, and the dialog looks like this. In this command, we've added the ability to define your default layer and default text style in RPS settings. So if you go to the RPS settings function, you can go down to label settings, and when you do that, you can pick your layer or create a layer in layer group, or you can define your text style in here from your list of defined text styles. Now in here, you can come down to the bottom and create a new style should you want to do that. Once you've set these, this will be defaulted to this project, but also every other project. And if this layer and text style doesn't exist in a future project, these will be created automatically based on the settings that are defined in this current project where I selected them. So now I can say OK. And at this point, now these are set. You can also get access to this rather than going to RPS settings, label settings. You can just click on the edit settings buttons to do the same exact thing. Okay. Now in here, you can also say when you're plotting, depending on the way your text style is set, if you set this into, for instance, 0.08 in sheet units, then if you have a plot scale of 50, then it will be the size of the text on the drawing in the plan view will be 50 times 0.08, which will be 4 feet. That will then be converted at the scale back down to 0.08 on your final drawing when you plot at 1 to 50. So it's important that you set your plot scale to whatever scale you think you're going to be drawing or producing your final drawing at. And this text style is calculated at the time it's drawn, and it doesn't update dynamically in the future, so you'd have to manually update it should you change your plot scale later. So it's worth knowing what kind of plot scale you're going to work at some point downstream. In this case, I'm going to change the plot scale, and I'm going to change it to 20. Now this is changing the value of the plot scale that you can typically find under the settings here for projects. You go to view and then plan view, and you'll see this is now set to 20 scale. And this is what this is using when you click on this button here. Now the slope label is always going to be labeled, but you can also add in things like bearing and azimuth label, slope distance label, and horizontal distance label. And when you calculate the elevations of the 2 points that define the slope, you can either pick on 3D locations, meaning 3D lines, 3D points, anything really has a 3D elevation, or you can actually say use a surface elevation. If you pick the surface elevation here, you can then pick the surface area, for instance this one that you want to use. This is this little area over here. So when we've picked, we're going to label using, let's say, surface elevations here, then we get asked to pick 0.1 and 0.2. Now when you pick 0.1 and 0.2, those 2 points could be 3D locations, or they could be points inside a triangle because I've got a surface defined here. So if I say I want to know the slope between here and here, it tells me the slope is going in this direction by 5.81%. Now the number of decimal places of your slope label is defined under here, under project settings. If you go to units and go to vertical angle, in here if I go to the decimal places, you can see here I've got my slope ratios and my percentage slope set to 2 decimal places. If you want those to display to 1 decimal, then you would change these to 0.1, and now you'll see it will regenerate the drawing, and now my slopes are now to 1 decimal place. The slope direction is calculated from the high point to the low point, and the arrow is always drawn downhill. So now you can just click on any 2 points that you want to click, and those points could be within a triangle like this, or they could be going across a triangle side. Now remember, it's not calculating a combined slope when you cross a triangle side, it's just calculating the slope between 2 3D locations that you select. Now if you want to label more than just the slope, you can then check on these other values, for example, and then you can say now I want to label between, let's say, here and here, and now you'll get a composite label that shows you all of the values between those 2 points. The beauty of this, defining this once in your RPS settings, is that no matter what you do and what project, you will always get the same answers, and it will always look the same, and it will always have the same styles, etc. Now you can change any of these at any time, and you can change the plot scale at any time. So if I go into the plot scale here and say, well, okay, I want this text to be a bit larger, I'm going to go to 40 scale now, And when I say I want to draw between these 2 points here and here, it's going to draw the text larger now. So it's calculated at the time when you draw. So if you do want to change the height of text without changing the text style, you can change the plot scale when you're doing it. And when you do that, it's going to increase the size of the text by 2. In this case, because I went from 20 scale to 40 scale, so the text has got twice as large. Okay, so that's how you use the command using surfaces. If we take a look at how we would use it in other modes, if we were looking over here on this part of the drawing here, what I could do here is I could pick a couple of lines here. If I go into here and I just pick some of these contour lines, like these guys here, and then let's say I come over here and I pick some of the labels I've already created, because I want to keep these layers visible. And at this point now I can use the rock pile isolate layers command, which is going to be found in the data prep toolbox, isolate layers, and that allows you to isolate just the layers that you've selected. Now it's more than one layer in this case. Now I want to label the slope, for instance, across these lines here, maybe between here and here, or I want to just label it across these areas. So now I can say I want to label just the slopes. I'm going to turn all these guys off here. I don't have a surface model in this case. And now I want to label using the line. So this is where snap modes come into play. In the earlier stage, we were using free snap between the triangles, or we were using point snap to snap to the points, the vertices of the surface. But in this case, I want to snap to the perpendicular to lines and also the near point on a line. And so in this case, I can now say OK. So when I now start selecting points in a contour, I want to label between, let's say, here and let's say here. It draws me my label directly on the drawing here between these contours. So I can then say between here and here, for example. Now, of course, if your text height is too big for that information, you would have to undo and undo, and then change your plot scale to, let's say, in this case, 10 scale, and say I want to go from here to here, and now I've got smaller labels for my drawing accordingly. So you can change the values at any time. You can label between lines, you can label between points. If I go back over here to my model over here and I want to label from point to point, again I can just say from here to here and it will draw me my label. If I change this back to, let's say, 40 scale now, and say I want to label between, let's say, here and here, and between here and here and here and here, you can see it's calculating the slope direction. If I look at the elevation values in here, so I now show the elevation labels. You can see that the direction of slope is being computed, in this case, between 112 and 105, therefore it's downhill, and it tells me the slope value is 7.2%. So this is a very fast calculation and labeling routine that allows us to label any type of slope on any type of drawing. Thank you.